Sponsoring this new fertility series is Let's Get Checked. They offer home testing kits for sexual health, men's health, and women's health. A kit gets sent discreetly to your place. You collect a sample and send it back. It was really easy to get the results. I got an email notifying me it was ready, and I popped on the website to read my results. I did their female fertility test to help me understand my hormonal health. For 20% off your own kits, use code DNA today at checkout on their website, letsgetchecked.com. Again, that's letsgetchecked.com with code DNA today for 20% off your kits.
How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
Hello, you're listening to DNA Today, a genetics podcast and radio show. I'm your host, Keir Deneen. On this show, I explore genetics' impact on our health through conversations with leaders in genetics. These are genetic counselors, researchers, doctors, patient advocates, and more. This episode is part of DNA Today's ongoing infertility series. The series was launched hearing from genetic counselor Lauren Isley. She shared about artificial reproductive technologies, also known as ARTs, and infertility genetic counseling. Last episode, we heard from Katie and Christina Bailey. They were sharing their journey to parenthood through reciprocal in vitro fertilization, or reciprocal IVF. We continue this conversation on this episode, so if you haven't heard the first part of our discussion, you're going to want to go back and listen to the previous episode where Christina and Katie Bailey talk about the beginning of their story with IVF. The Baileys have a large following of nearly 100,000 on Instagram, so you can join their fans by following them at Baby Bailey Mama Drama. Anyways, here's where we left off. The healthcare team you had was really receptive and able to process with you and make sure that the decisions you were making, you were thinking through and comfortable with, and that I'm sure really helped the process, because if you were with people that weren't that way and weren't very supportive and patient, then it probably would have felt like a much worse process to go through.
Definitely. And we had done our research before we chose a clinic, and one of the reasons that we continue to go back to that clinic and the reason we went back there to have our second child was because of the support and just feeling comfortable there, feeling like it's another home for us, just because they know us and they know our family and they know everything we've been through.
Where we left off with that second round of IVF, you were able to get viable embryos from that. How many did you end up transferring to Katie?
So during the second round at egg retrieval, 18 eggs were retrieved, which is a lot, and they split that. So 9 were ICSI and 9 were naturally fertilized, and that resulted in 11 fertilized embryos. And then from there, they transferred 2 embryos.
And so they usually don't do too many, because if 2 end up turning into a pregnancy, then it's twins, and any more than that can have a lot of complications. So I'm sure that was a lot of the thinking around that. Where did it go from there in terms of transferring those 2 embryos? And then on the flip side, what did you do with the other embryos that you weren't using at that time?
So we did transfer the 2 because at the time we wanted the best chances and we were open to the idea of twins. In fact, we wanted twins.
You've already gone through so much of the process. It's kind of like, if you can have 2 kids out of this, that's amazing.
Yes, exactly. And then as far as the leftover embryos, they were frozen and they still are. So they're in storage.
One of the embryos ended up taking, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So we had some complications. So after I was pregnant and we had the positive pregnancy test, a time had passed, and one of them actually, it was like it was a miscarriage, and so we lost the 1 embryo, but 1 remained. It did cause some complications throughout the rest of the pregnancy, but that 1 embryo did grow into our first daughter.
And so then Kennedy was born.
Yes.
It's a very exciting time, I'm sure, and how life must have changed after that, of going through this long process and then you end up having Kennedy. And is it different looking back on this process than feel like while you were going through it, just kind of knowing now that you have Kennedy and all of that?
I would say almost the entire pregnancy we weren't sure if we were going to have a baby. They told us for the most part that this was a high risk pregnancy and that our little embryo might not survive in there just because there was a huge blood clot resting up against the little sac that was in there. So for most of the pregnancy, we tried not to be too happy about it, which sounds pretty sad. There were definitely moments of happiness, but still, after the happiness, I would say, I'm like, okay, but prepare yourself. You know, what if this doesn't happen? It's okay. You'll be fine. You have embryos that are frozen. You can try again. Just constantly reassuring ourselves that don't get your hopes up. But around the third trimester, they had told us we were safe. The baby was big enough now and the baby would be born. But I think in the back of our minds, we still thought, is there a baby in there? I remember when I felt her kick for the first time, I thought, oh my gosh, there's an actual baby in there. It just kind of blew my mind away. And I remember when she first came out, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe we made this baby. It was crazy to think that both of us played a role. She's here, she's ours, we get to take her home. Just totally shocked by the whole experience.
And how great, like you said, that you were both able to play a role in this and really be a team throughout the process and have each other as support, and then to be able to like have Kennedy together is so exciting. And that you then, not too long later, went to conceive a second time. How was that process different than, you know, trying to conceive for Kennedy and going through and kind of knowing a little bit more when you're going into this? Because the first time you were really learning as you were going.
Right. I would say the second time it was nice because it was like cutting your journey in half. You're like, you know, fast forwarding through it. So I didn't have to do the injections this time. And it was all Katie getting the injections. I felt really bad for her. But it was nice because it was a shorter time frame. So we went back and it wasn't so much time before knowing if we were going to be pregnant. And I remember the day of our embryo transfer, just thinking, oh my gosh, in just a couple minutes, we could be pregnant all over again. And I remember just watching when they do the transfer, there's an ultrasound screen on there and you see, you know, the little screen, you see this little flicker of light leave the little needle thing they stick up there, and just seeing the little light flicker and thinking, okay, that's our baby. And now it's time for the dreaded 2-week wait, which is where you wait and then you have your blood drawn to see if you have that pregnancy hormone in there. So we waited that 2 weeks, and then Katie went and took her blood test, and we anxiously waited by the phone for hopefully that news that we're pregnant.
And so cool to be able to see the conception actually happen, because most couples don't get to see that if they're naturally conceiving, or even IUI or other forms of artificial reproductive technology. But it's so cool that you had that moment where you actually like watched it happen in some way.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
And we also have a first picture of our baby, which is awesome. So they give you a little embryo photo. So we always say that, you know, we knew you from the very beginning, just having that first baby picture of them before, you know, they started to grow into a little baby.
That is really cool. The first picture in the baby book, I'm sure.
Yes, it was.
With that pregnancy, were you able to use the same sperm donor, or were you using a different one?
It was the same. So they were from the same batch of embryos as our first child. So in a way, they're almost the same age, really.
Right. In terms of when the egg met the sperm, they're the same age. Yeah.
Exactly.
Genetically, they are then full siblings.
Yes.
During this time, you said it was a little bit different of having only Katie having the needles for the hormones. How was that a little bit different of this time only Katie going through the medical side of having the hormone shots, and the other like appointments were more centered around Katie?
It was a lot easier, mostly because Christina wasn't crying for no reason from the hormones.
I'm sure that helped a little bit.
So it was, yeah, like Christina said, the whole process was faster. It was easier because we knew what to expect. And then Christina was really just there to help and support me. We didn't have to worry about her own, you know, regimen of medication.
And then how was this pregnancy maybe a little bit different from with Kennedy? Was there a lot of aspects that were the same, or Because some people are like, yep, my pregnancies are all kind of the same. And others are like, oh my gosh, they are so different from each other. It's almost like I'm a different person with this pregnancy.
So the second pregnancy was a lot different than the first one. When I was pregnant with our first daughter, honestly, besides the pregnancy being kind of high risk and the blood clot ordeal, the pregnancy itself was not bad. I wasn't super sick. With Charlotte, it was the complete opposite. I was really sick the whole time with Charlotte. So much that I was thinking, like, there's pregnancy so different. There's no way she's a girl. She must be a boy. Because they always say it's different pregnancies. No, she's definitely a girl. But yeah, it's crazy how different two experiences can be.
Yeah, I'm sure. And going through the first one, you're probably like, okay, I've done the pregnancy thing. And then you're like, wow, this is a different experience than it was the first time. Did you get a chance during the pregnancies to have any genetic testing or like meet with a genetic counselor?
So they did do a lot of blood work on me in regards to genetics, just because they want to make sure in the beginning that you're getting a donor that doesn't align with your genetics the bad way, which can always happen. But luckily, none of my genetics had any red flags in there. So we were okay to choose any donor we wanted. Most of the time, the donors are screened for anything crazy, but I remember them explaining about blood type or something in the beginning, that there's some times where they make the person choose a certain donor just because of blood type reasoning.
Was it maybe carrier screening of saying if you carried a condition, that making sure that the donor then didn't carry the same condition so the child wouldn't be at risk? I'm taking a guess here.
Yeah, no, you are exactly correct. I was drawing a blank.
And so you were able to do that, and sounds like you weren't a carrier for any conditions that they screened you for, so it didn't matter in terms of donor status. So did you then later, Katie, during the pregnancies, did you have any non-invasive prenatal screenings, taking a blood sample from you and then isolating the fetal DNA?
I did do like the state testing that they offer, and that's just the blood test. Beyond that, I did do at 9 weeks, I did the testing where it tells you the gender, and then it screens for any of the other type of chromosomal abnormalities.
Yep.
And then in hindsight, we could have done additional testing when they were fresh embryos before our first child, before they were frozen, and that would have done the same. It would have tested for all those abnormalities. It would have tested for gender. We opted out of it, but in hindsight, we really wish we did it at that time, because going back for our second, we wanted to, but in order to do it, they would have had to thaw the embryos, test them, and then refreeze them, which they said probably it would be fine, but it could damage the embryos and you could lose some of them. And so we really didn't want to do that. So looking back, we wish we had just done it when they were fresh embryos with our first.
Right. If it sounds like doing the PGT of pre-implantation genetic testing of the embryos. And it sounds like people talked to you about it maybe at that time, but it just wasn't something you wanted to do back then. And now you're like, oh, kind of maybe would have been good.
Yeah. And at the beginning, they actually told us that it wasn't really recommended because we were so young. We were in our early 20s. And actually, we were told at the beginning of this that there's no problem here. You guys will probably get pregnant your first round because you're both so young. You're in great health. Everything looks great. Uterus looks great. Eggs look great. And then, of course, that didn't happen. So we were really concerned about, should we have these embryos tested? And they told us no. The first time was just kind of a fluke. We're not sure what happened there. But this time, all the eggs look great. The embryos look great. There's no reason you should be alarmed. There's no reason to test them. It was also an additional cost. And at that point, we were so much money involved. So we're like, we don't need to spend any more money on this. They told us it's fine. So we're just not going to do it. And of course, now to this day, we still regret not doing it just because it's one less thing to worry about. They also tell you that if an embryo is actually having a genetic abnormality, it probably won't take. So to this day, we still wonder if one of those embryos we implanted or that we transferred had a genetic abnormality. Could we have prevented that one embryo from leaving? Would that have made a difference? Would we have had 2 children at this point, or, 2 from that pregnancy? Just a lot of what ifs in this process, of course.
A lot of embryos that get implanted that don't become a successful pregnancy is because of a chromosomal abnormality of not necessarily being inherited by one, but just sometimes when the eggs and sperm come together, it's just not a perfect 46 chromosomes. And that, stepping aside from IVF pregnancies, even a lot of naturally conceived pregnancies, a lot of people don't realize that they've even had a miscarriage because it happens so early before you'd even realize you're pregnant. So the human body isn't so great at becoming pregnant that I think a lot, like the general public kind of thinks, oh, it's very easy. And you start, going to do this and you're like, wow, actually human body's not really efficient at doing this. That may surprise some people.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They showed us the statistics of actually a woman getting naturally pregnant, and we were blown away at how low it was. Just thinking, wow, I guess it really isn't that easy to get pregnant on your own if you were to do it that way.
Right. Even in high school, they're very like, oh, protect yourself and everything like that, which of course we want to do. But it kind of makes you think like, oh, it must be so easy. And it's like, some couples, it does take a while to become pregnant, and depending on which route you're doing to get there. Another point that you're talking about was the finances of all this. And you've been pretty public about the cost surrounding this. I was looking at one of your blog posts kind of outlining the money that you've spent. How much did you end up spending? I don't know if you want to talk about like maybe per cycle or just what's the total at this point. And is this similar to what you've heard of other people?
Well, since we ended up doing 2 rounds of IVF, which isn't really typical for someone going into the process, and then also doing the cost of having our second child, Charlotte, which is, thawing an embryo and then having it transferred, we spent around $30,000. But there's so many different financial plans that you could go on to. I remember they told us at the beginning that you could actually pay a little bit less, and it would be financing, I think, 3 rounds of IVF. And we thought, oh, that's ridiculous. We don't need 3 rounds. Turns out we did need 2. So maybe we should have gone for that route. But I remember most of the costs were broken down into smaller amounts, just constantly paying a smaller bill. There was one that came that was, I think, 15. And I think that one really shocked us when we got that in the mail. But overall, it's like you're spending money here, you're spending money there, and then eventually you look at your bank account and you realize, oh my gosh, we have spent so much money trying to create a child. But, to us, it was so worth it. And we had been saving up for this moment. We didn't have a big wedding. We saved up a lot of money just so we could have a child this way.
And you really need to be able to save up in order to finance this. And there's such a discrepancy in terms of when you look at gay couples versus straight couples, and just straight couples can oftentimes just get pregnant for free. And so there is, like, unfortunately a disparity there of gay couples having to pay all this money to be able to have a child themselves, and being a factor there.
Right. I totally agree. And I know that many, heterosexual couples also go through IVF too, but the fact that some of them don't have to go through that, we're just a little envious of that, wishing that for gay couples that there was a way for us to get pregnant and for it to be financially covered would be such a relief, just because there isn't a set way to go about having kids for free in any way.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully we see changes in terms of insurance companies really realizing this and covering much more of the costs. And they cover some costs depending on the insurance plan. And just like everything else in healthcare, our insurance plans vary so much. But I definitely hope to see this change in the future, and realizing that infertility can be defined in a lot of different ways.
I completely agree. I hope to see a lot of changes.
And I think you're definitely helping with your presence on social media and really just educating the public on all of these topics. One of those I was thinking about is growing up with Kennedy and Charlotte being on social media, and someday they'll be able to Google and find these things, and I'm sure you're going to share as they grow up. Have you thought about how you're going to talk to them about how they were conceived and the story of their pregnancy?
Yeah, and Kennedy's already at that age. She's 3 right now, and she's already noticed that all of her friends that live close to us all have a mommy and a daddy. So we have already had that talk with her about how some families don't have a daddy, or some families have 2 daddies. But it's hard because the friends that we do have who are gay, who have kids, they're not in our lives on a daily basis. Her friends that are in her life on a daily basis all have a mom and a dad. So the concept can be very confusing, especially when our daughter's the one who's addicted to Disney movies and all of them have a prince and a princess and they all get married and they all live happily ever after.
Which is really frustrating. When are we going to get a Disney film that features a gay couple? I don't know when it will be, but I'm anxiously waiting.
I agree. I am waiting for that moment just so our daughter can see that happen and, just think, oh my gosh, I'm just like, that family on that movie. She seems to be pretty understanding though. I mean, even when we explained to her, yeah, that's cool. They have a daddy, you have two moms. Yeah. And then it's like, do you love your moms? Yeah, I do. I'm like, okay, well, they don't, that friend doesn't have two moms. No, they don't. So, I mean, just at the age of 3, she doesn't really understand it, but we've also told her that it's pretty awesome that both of her moms carried her at one point in her life.
Yeah.
And then she told us that she wants to carry a little brother in her stomach. So, I mean, you just see how the concept isn't really getting through to her yet. But we plan on being completely open with her, just explaining that, the sperm donor helped make you. And, we're so thankful that there are guys out there who donate because without them, we can't have any children. So just, showing her everything. I copied everything from that profile. So showing her what he looks like, what were his interests, why we chose him, how we're so lucky that we have him. So just being completely honest with her is what we plan on doing with both of our kids.
That sounds like a fantastic approach, and just the fact that you were able to save all that information so that, when they are asking questions, you can be like, this is everything I know, here you go, and be able to present that to them. Something else I was thinking about along these lines of just being in the genetics world and, whenever I'm at a party or something, people are always asking about the direct consumer tests, the 23andMe, the Ancestry, all of that. In the donor-conceived community, this has become a really big change in terms of people that were donor-conceived, if they're doing this testing of potentially being able to connect with, or your kids possibly their sperm donor. Has this been something that you've thought about or would explore with them? I don't know even what the rules really are around that, because a lot of these concepts are new. It used to be you could be an anonymous sperm donor, and that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, so it's something that we've thought about just briefly. I would assume that they wouldn't really be doing any tests like that until they're older. So at that point, if that's something that they really want to explore, that's fine. We've both done the 23andMe test, and we both liked it. We found out a lot of information, and I mean, to be honest, the like where you can find your relatives, there's not a ton of people on there yet. I'm assuming in the future there will be more. So, I mean, if that's something that they really want to do, maybe this is a question for you, but if there's someone who's a sperm donor and they're anonymous and they choose to be anonymous, I don't know if they would do a 23andMe test or something like that where they would choose, because you can choose to connect with your relatives. So
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think they'd have to choose that, but it's also that if, say, their sibling or their parent did it, that they could show up on Charlotte or Kennedy saying, oh, this is your biological grandmother, this is your biological aunt or uncle. Obviously, socially, they're not. But in terms of genetically, that has been things that I've talked to a genetic counselor, Brian Kirkpatrick, who really focuses and specializes in the adoptee and donor-conceived community, and having those pop up and just how to handle that socially and how to think about it before diving into conversations with people. And it's definitely a very interesting area and a lot of things to really consider before doing it. So yeah, it's very complex.
And we do follow some people just on Instagram who actually do have the sibling registry. And we have seen that, some gay couples will actually take their kids on hangouts with their other half siblings. It's not something that we even looked into. Also on our donor's profile, one of the things, we were looking for so many things in a donor, but one of the things wasn't, do they leave their contact information so when the child's 18, they can have that last contact, which who knows if the donor is even at that contact information anymore. But our donor actually didn't have that option. And so when we had picked him, we were like, well, we like everything else. That happens to not be an option. So, oh well, at this point.
Hard to get everything in one go.
Exactly. It is so hard.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, do you have any parting advice for other people that are going through fertility treatments? Anything to tease that maybe we can see from you guys in the future?
As far as advice, I would say definitely lean on each other and be honest. Don't ever keep anything hidden. I know we've seen, unfortunately, some couples that just don't last this process. I know we were very fortunate that even though we had a lot of bumps on both of our journeys to have our 2 kids, that we did end up with 2 kids. And I know some people go down this road and they end up with 0 kids. And I can't imagine the pain they're in, or what they're doing to overcome that. And sometimes the relationship just doesn't last. It's a hard struggle. So just making sure that you are honest, lean on each other. Don't be afraid to cry too much. It definitely makes you feel better. And as far as a teaser, we are definitely going to be having, I want 2 more kids, but Katie wants 1 more. We are planning on having another child soon, and we're still up in the air about how we're going to try to do this. So who's carrying, how we're doing it. Yeah, it's crazy, but it'll definitely happen once we finally make that decision.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting, and just being able to have those conversations and say, with the experiences you've had of what you're doing this round, and I'm guessing this is like lockdown in terms of public and Instagram, but I think I have to ask, the fans would be mad if I didn't, because you guys have a lot of fans. Any names on your list, or any boy names? Because you have Charlotte and Kennedy, or do we have to wait to find out?
Christina Jr.
No, Christina Jr. We definitely have 1 set girl name and 2 set boy names in mind, but we definitely don't want to share. We'll share that the girl name starts with an A, and the boy name that we want for sure starts with a G. So that's definitely a teaser, because we have not told anybody even that information. And Kennedy, if you asked her if she wanted another sister or another brother, she would tell you she wants a brother, and she'll take Charlotte back in order to get a brother if she wants one. And I'm like, that's not how it works. We don't take Charlotte back to the hospital.
Yeah, they don't take returns, surprisingly.
No, they don't. And I'm like,
you can't get your money back.
She's too expensive. We're keeping her. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your journey, and for just being so public online and raising awareness for that this is an option for people to do. And there are so many options. This is the one that has worked for your family, and really can't thank you enough for just continuing to educate people and for educating my listeners. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having us on. We really hope that everyone out there loves our story.
I hope you enjoyed hearing from the Baileys. As I mentioned before, they have nearly 100,000 followers on Instagram at Baby Bailey Mama Drama. You can subscribe to their YouTube channel, same thing, Baby Bailey Mama Drama. And they also have a blog, surprise, surprise, babybaileymamadrama.wordpress.com. And for more information on this episode, you can go to dnapodcast.com. That is where you're going to find links to a lot of things that we've been talking about, links to all of the Instagram, YouTube, WordPress I just talked about, so you don't have to remember everything. All you have to remember is dnapodcast.com. I have over 100 episodes of interviews just like this, talking to genetic counselors, researchers, patient advocates, and doctors, many more genetic conversations to learn about genetics. If you're on Twitter, you can head over to DNA Podcast, and if you're on Instagram, head over to DNA Radio. Would love to connect with you on there. And as always, if you have any questions for myself or my guests for this episode, Christina and Katie, you can email into info@dnapodcast.com. Love hearing any feedback you have for the show, any comments on today's episode. If it really resonated with you, always great to hear from you. info@dnapodcast.com, and leave a rating or review. That would be really fantastic and helps to elevate the show. Let's Get Checked offers a variety of home testing kits, including fertility, but also sexual health with STI testing. According to the World Health Organization, of the 19 million Americans who contract a sexually transmitted disease each year, only 50% are aware that they're infected. Only 50%. People who are sexually active should all be doing STI testing on a regular basis. Luckily, Let's Get Checked makes it easy by sending a kit right to you in discreet packaging. It's just like the other kits I've talked about. You collect a sample, pop it back in the mail. Wait time is quick with results in only 2 to 5 days. As most of you know, Let's Get Checked also provides fertility testing too. If these episodes make you curious about your own fertility status, you can start learning with their kits. I did the female fertility test and had my sample run in their CLIA certified lab to know more about my hormone levels for specifically follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone and a bunch of others. Try any of these kits for yourself by going to letsgetchecked.com and use code DNA Today for 20% off your kits. Again, you can use code DNA Today for 20% off your kits at letsgetchecked.com, and that code works for any of the sponsors from the show. DNA Today is the code to be getting all these exclusive deals as a DNA Today listener, and a thank you. Join me next time to learn and discover the new advances in the world of genetics.
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, are all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA.